Part 1. The Child of Light and the Cholera Covenant, 1856 to 1873.
Everything started on a night in 1856 that felt like the end of the world. It was July 10th, in the tiny village of Smiljan, in what is now Croatia. Outside, a lightning storm was tearing the sky apart, bolts of electricity hitting the earth with a violence that terrified the locals. The midwife, superstitious and trembling, delivered the baby and told his mother, Duca, this child will be a child of darkness. But Duca, who was an unsung genius herself, inventing household tools and weaving intricate patterns without ever learning to read, looked at her son and corrected her. No, she said, he will be a child of light. She had no idea how literal that prophecy would become. Young Nikola was a strange kid from the jump. While other boys were playing in the dirt, he was obsessed with the mechanics of the world. He once caught June bugs and glued them to a wooden cross, trying to use their wing power to drive a tiny motor. He was fighting a specific kind of frontier ignorance, where anything beyond farming or the church was seen as the devil's work or a waste of time. His father, Milutin, was a stern Orthodox priest who had already mapped out Nikola's life. He was to follow in his footsteps and join the priesthood. But Nikola's mind was a different kind of temple. He had what we now call a photographic memory, but it was more intense than that. He could visualize entire machines in 3D in his mind, testing them, running them, and fixing flaws before he ever touched a piece of metal. Tragedy struck early with his older brother. Dane died in a riding accident. Dane was a golden child, and his death left a massive, echoing hole in the family. Nikola felt a crushing pressure to live up to his brother's ghost. He threw himself into his studies, sometimes reading through the entire night by candlelight. His father hated it, thinking the constant reading would ruin his health and pull him away from God. But Nikola wasn't running away from God. He was looking for the gears of the universe. He was obsessed with the idea of energy, how it moved, where it came from, and how it could be tamed. At age 17, Nikola was hit by a monster, cholera. This was the 1870s, and cholera was a death sentence. For 9 months he lay in bed, his body wasting away, his skin turning gray. He was so close to death that the doctors had given up. One day, his father came to his bedside, devastated. Nikola, barely able to whisper, looked at him and made a high-stakes gamble. I may get well, he said, if you let me study engineering. His father, who had spent years trying to force him into the church, finally broke. He promised, you shall go to the best technical institution in the world. It was like Nikola had been plugged into a socket. Within days, the fever broke, and he started to recover. He had cheated death because he finally had a mission that his father couldn't block. He wasn't going to spend his life behind a pulpit. He was going to master the lightning he was born under. He packed his bags to the Polytechnic Institute in Graz, carrying nothing but a few books and a mind that was already light years ahead of the 19th century. He was heading into a world that still used oil lamps and horses, but in his head, he was already building a future made of pure, invisible power.
Part 2. The Fire of Graz and the Secret of the Sand, 1875 to 1884.
Tesla arrived at the university in Graz, Austria, and he wasn't there to party. He was a machine. He started his days at 3 a.m. and didn't stop until 11 p.m. He was so intense that his professors actually wrote letters to his father saying, "Your son is a star of the first rank, but if you don't pull him out, he will kill himself from overwork." He was fighting the ignorance of the current scientific status quo. At the time, everyone used direct current DC. It was messy, it sparked, and it couldn't be sent over long distances without losing power. In a physics class, Tesla watched a DC motor sparking like a 4th of July firework and told the professor, "We don't need those brushes. We can make a motor that doesn't spark." His professor, a man named Poschel, mocked him in front of the whole class. He told Tesla that what he was suggesting was a perpetual motion impossibility, but Tesla didn't stop. He was obsessed. However, the pressure of his own genius started to crack him. He developed a gambling addiction, losing his tuition money at the card tables. He was ashamed. He dropped out of school, and for a while he vanished. His family thought he was dead. This was a dark period, a moment where the light almost went out, but he eventually pulled himself together and landed in Budapest in 1881, working for a telephone exchange. It was here that he suffered a bizarre nervous breakdown. His senses became so sharp it was a curse. He could hear a clock ticking 3 rooms away. The sound of a carriage on the street felt like an earthquake in his skull. His nervous system was on fire. He was experiencing the raw, unfiltered energy of the world. One afternoon in 1882, Tesla was walking through a park in Budapest with a friend, watching the sunset. He was reciting a poem from Goethe's Faust about the sun moving on to light up another world. Suddenly, he froze. A lightning bolt of intuition hit his brain. He saw it, the rotating magnetic field. He grabbed a stick and started frantically drawing a diagram in the dirt. He told his friend, "Look, see my motor. Watch me reverse it." He had solved the mystery of alternating current, AC. He realized that by using 2 or more currents that were out of phase, he could create a magnetic field that rotated, pulling a motor along with it. No sparks, no brushes, no limits. He had just invented the modern world in a patch of dirt. He knew he had to get this idea to the one man who could help him build it, Thomas Alva Edison. He went to Paris to work for the Continental Edison Company, where he fixed power plants that nobody else could touch. His boss, Charles Batchelor, realized that Tesla was a once-in-a-generation mind. Batchelor gave him a letter of recommendation to take to America. It was a simple note addressed to Edison that said, "I know 2 great men. One is you and the other is this young man." In 1884, Tesla boarded a ship for New York. It was a disaster of a trip. He was robbed, his luggage was stolen, and he lost his tickets. He arrived at the docks of Manhattan with exactly 4 cents in his pocket, a book of his own poetry, and the blueprints for his AC motor burned into his brain. He was a penniless immigrant in a city of millions, walking toward a meeting with the most famous man in America. He was about to step into the war of the currents, a battle of egos and electricity that would determine the future of the human race.
On the street, copper is hungry for more than it can eat. A heavyweight dragging from the basement floor, charging the meter while they're knocking
Part 3. The Battle of the Titans and the $50,000 Bet, 1884 to 1886.
Tesla walked into Edison's office on his very first day in New York. The two men couldn't have been more different. Edison was a self-taught mucker's guy who believed in trial and error. He'd try 1,000 different filaments for a light bulb until one worked. He was a businessman, a hustler, and he was deeply invested in his own direct current DC system. Tesla, on the other hand, was a mathematical poet. He did everything in his head with precision and elegance. He tried to explain his AC system to Edison, but Edison wouldn't even listen. He told Tesla, "People like AC because it's dangerous. It's high voltage. Stick to DC." Edison saw how hard Tesla worked and decided to use him. He had a bunch of broken DC dynamos and power plants that were losing money. He told Tesla, "If you can redesign these machines and improve their efficiency, I'll give you $50,000. In the 1880s, $50,000 was like $1 million today. Tesla worked like a demon for 6 months, barely sleeping, redesigning the entire system and saving Edison a fortune. When he went to collect his money, Edison just laughed at him. He leaned back in his chair and said, "Tesla, you don't understand our American humor." Tesla didn't find it funny. He was a man of honor, a man who believed a promise was a sacred bond. He quit on the spot. But New York is a cold place for a man with no money. For the next year, the man who had the blueprints for the future in his head was forced to work as a ditch digger for $2 a day. He was literally digging the trenches for the DC cables he knew were obsolete. He called it the most painful time of his life. He was fighting the ignorance of a world that saw him only as a pair of hands, not a mind. But even in those trenches, he didn't stop dreaming. He talked to anyone who would listen about his rotating field. And eventually, the foreman of the crew realized the guy digging in the mud was a genius. He introduced Tesla to some investors, and the real war was about to begin.
Part 4. The Ditch Diggers' Dawn and the War of the Currents, 1886 to 1888.
Tesla's first year in New York was a brutal lesson in the difference between the beauty of science and the coldness of business. After quitting Edison's company because of that American humor joke about the $50,000, Tesla found himself at rock bottom. He was a man with a mind that could visualize the mechanics of the stars, yet he was forced to pick up a shovel. From the spring of 1886 to the spring of 1887, he worked as a common laborer, digging ditches for the very same Edison Electric Light Company he had just left. He spent his days in the mud of Manhattan, breathing in the cold dust and the stench of the city, literally burying the heavy copper cables for a direct current DC system that he knew was inefficient and limited. He later said that during this time, his high education in various branches of science, mechanics, and literature seemed like a mockery. He felt like he was a ghost in a world that only valued sweat. But Tesla wasn't just digging holes. He was waiting. He spent his lunch breaks talking to the foreman and the investors who passed by. He had a way of speaking that was magnetic. He didn't just talk about motors. He talked about a world where power was as free and accessible as the air we breathe. Eventually, his words reached the ears of Alfred S. Brown and Charles F. Peck. These men weren't just looking for a worker. They were looking for a revolution. They realized that the lanky, elegant immigrant with the dirt under his fingernails was actually the most dangerous mind in the city. In April 1887, they helped him set up the Tesla Electric Company with a laboratory at 89 Liberty Street, just a few blocks away from Edison's headquarters. This was the moment the War of the Currents truly began. Tesla finally had a place to build the models he had been running in his head for years. He didn't need to experiment like Edison did. He simply took the blueprints from his mind and translated them into metal. He perfected his induction motor, a machine that uses rotating magnetic field to create power without the sparking, friction-prone brushes that made Edison's DC motors a fire hazard. To prove his genius to the skeptical investors, he performed a legendary demonstration called the Egg of Columbus. He used a rotating magnetic field to make a copper egg stand on its end and spin at high speed. It was a piece of scientific theater that proved he could control invisible forces with absolute precision. Word of this wizard from Liberty Street reached a man named George Westinghouse. Westinghouse was a powerhouse of an industrialist from Pittsburgh who had already made a fortune with air brakes for trains. He was a visionary who understood that if America was going to grow, it couldn't rely on Edison's DC power, which could only travel a mile before the lights started to dim. Westinghouse saw Tesla's alternating current AC patents and realized he had found the holy grail of energy. He didn't try to cheat Tesla. He walked into Tesla's lab and offered him a deal that was unheard of, $60,000 in cash and stocks, plus a royalty of $2.50 for every horsepower of electricity produced. This alliance between Tesla's brain and Westinghouse's bank account sent Thomas Edison into a blind rage. Edison realized that his entire empire was at risk. If AC took over, his DC patents would be worthless. This triggered one of the darkest and most ignorant propaganda campaigns in history. Edison started a fear campaign to convince the public that AC was a silent killer. He paid neighborhood kids to bring him stray cats and dogs, which he would then publicly electrocute using Tesla's AC system to show how dangerous it was. He even tried to push the term for the new electric chair to be called being Westinghouse. He was fighting the ignorance of the masses by using their own fear against them, trying to hold back the future to protect his bottom line. Tesla, however, remained calm. He wasn't interested in the mudslinging. He was focused on the biggest project the world had ever seen, taming the power of Niagara Falls. He knew that if he could capture the energy of that falling water and send it to Buffalo and New York City, the War of the Currents would be over forever. He was moving from the small lab on Liberty Street to the grandest stage on the planet, ready to show the world that electricity wasn't something to be feared, but a force that could liberate humanity from the darkness.
Part 5. The City of Light and the Taming of the Falls, 1893 to 1895.
The War of the Currents reached its boiling point in 1893, and the battlefield was the world's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. This was the most important event of the century, a chance for America to show the world that it was the leader of the future. The organizers needed a way to light the massive fairgrounds, and they put out a bid for contract. Thomas Edison's General Electric bid over $1 million. George Westinghouse, armed with Tesla's alternating current AC system, swept in and underbid them by nearly half, winning the contract for about $500,000. Edison was so petty about the loss that he refused to let Westinghouse use his patented light bulbs, forcing Westinghouse to scramble and invent a new type of bulb just for the fair. When President Grover Cleveland pushed the button to open the fair on May 1st, 1893, the world changed forever. In a split second, over 100,000 incandescent lamps flickered to life, turning the white city into a dreamscape of shimmering light. It was the first time most people had ever seen a city illuminated at night. It looked like magic, but it was pure Tesla. While the crowds gasped at the spectacle, Tesla was in his own exhibit, performing feats that looked like they belonged in a sorcerer's workshop. To counter Edison's propaganda about AC being a killer, Tesla would stand on a platform, allowing hundreds of thousands of volts of high-frequency current to pass through his own body. His hair would stand on end, and blue sparks would dance off his fingertips to light lamps held in his hands. He was a human conductor, proving with his own life that his system was not only superior, but safe when handled by those who understood it. The victory in Chicago was the final nail in the coffin for direct current, but Tesla's true masterpiece was still under construction: Niagara Falls. For years, engineers had looked at the massive power of the falls and dreamed of harnessing it. With the success of the World's Fair, the Niagara Falls Cataract Construction Company awarded the contract to Westinghouse and Tesla. They built a massive powerhouse using giant Tesla-designed AC generators. In November 1896, the switch was thrown. The power of the falling water was converted into electricity and sent 26 miles away to Buffalo, New York. Within a few years, it was powering New York City itself. This was the birth of the modern power grid. Tesla had achieved the impossible. He had tamed one of the greatest forces of nature and used it to light the world. He was the most famous scientist on Earth, a man who seemed to be pulling the future into the present with his bare hands. But as is often the case with Tesla, the peak of his triumph was followed by a devastating blow. In March 1895, a fire broke out in his laboratory on South Fifth Avenue. It wasn't just a building burning. It was his life's work. The fire destroyed his blueprints, his experimental models, his research on X-rays, and his notes on wireless communication. He lost years of data and thousands of dollars in equipment. For any other man, this would have been the end. But Tesla, ever the visionary, didn't stay in the ashes for long. He told reporters that he could recreate everything from memory because the machines were already built in his head. However, the loss of his physical records allowed rivals like Guglielmo Marconi to get a head start in the race for radio. Tesla was about to enter a new phase of his life, moving away from simple wires and toward the most ambitious goal of all: wireless power. The world moves slowly, and new truths are difficult to see. Nikola Tesla.
The coppers humming in the basement wire. Selling the heat, but hiding the fire. Edison's heavy, dragging the line. Counting the nickels and buying the time. A static ghost in a glass machine. The brightest lie that you've ever seen. Do I want to know about the surge in the dark? Who is the genius? Who is the spark? Switch the current, let the chains all go. AC versus DC, everything we know. Alternating pulse in a desert wind. Watch the world begin.
Part 6. The Invisible Waves and the Birth of the Robot, 1895 to 1899.
After the fire of 1895, most men would have taken their insurance money and retired to a quiet life. Not Tesla. He was like a man possessed, driven by the belief that he had only scratched the surface of the universe's secrets. He moved into a new lab and immediately dove into the study of radiant energy. Long before Wilhelm Röntgen officially discovered X-rays, Tesla was already taking what he called shadowgraphs. He was taking pictures of his own bones and even warned the scientific community about the biological dangers of these rays, noticing that they could cause skin irritation and stinging. While the world was still catching up to the idea of light bulbs, Tesla was already looking through the human body, fighting the ignorance of a medical world that didn't yet understand the power of the invisible spectrum. But Tesla's biggest obsession during this period was the elimination of wires. He hated the clutter of the physical world. He believed that the very air we breathe and the ground we stand on could be used to transmit information and power. This led him to the invention of radio. Now, history books often give the credit to Guglielmo Marconi, but the truth is far more complicated. Marconi used 17 of Tesla's patents to make his first radio transmission. When told that Marconi was becoming famous using his work, Tesla calmly replied, "Marconi is a good fellow. Let him continue. He is using 17 of my patents." Tesla wasn't interested in the fame. He was interested in the ultimate goal of a world wireless system. He was fighting the ignorance of a patent system that prioritized the person who got to the market first over the person who actually invented the technology. In 1898, Tesla decided to show the public just how far he had come. He went to Madison Square Garden for the electrical exhibition and unveiled a small iron-hulled boat. It didn't have any visible connection to anything. No wires, no strings, nothing. Tesla stood at a distance with a small control box and made the boat move, turn, and flash its lights on command. The crowd was absolutely terrified. Some people shouted that it was magic. Others thought there was a trained monkey hidden inside, and many believed Tesla was using telepathy. Tesla called it teleautomation. He had just invented the remote control and, by extension, the foundation of modern robotics and drone technology. He tried to sell the idea to the U.S. Navy as a way to create wireless torpedoes to end all wars through sheer technological superiority. But they were too ignorant to see its potential. They told him it was a toy. By 1899, New York had become too small and too noisy for Tesla's grandest experiments. He needed space, high altitude, and a place where he could shake the earth. He moved to Colorado Springs, where he built a massive barn-like laboratory with a 142-foot metal mast topped with a giant copper ball. Here, he became a true master of lightning. He spent his nights creating artificial bolts of electricity that were 135 feet long, producing thunder that could be heard 15 miles away. He discovered that the earth itself was a conductor, and he succeeded in lighting 200 lamps wirelessly at a distance of 26 miles. He was proving that the planet was essentially a giant battery. If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. Nikola Tesla. It was during one of these lonely nights in the mountains that Tesla recorded something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He picked up a series of rhythmic signals on his equipment, 1-2-3-4. He became convinced that he was receiving a message from another planet, possibly Mars. The press ridiculed him, calling him a mad scientist, but Tesla didn't care. He was fighting the ultimate ignorance, the idea that we are alone in the universe. He left Colorado Springs in 1900 with a radical plan. He was going back to New York to build a tower that would change everything, a tower that would provide free, wireless energy to every human being on the planet. He had the science. Now he just needed the money.
Part 7. Wardenclyffe and the Tower of Broken Dreams, 1900 to 1906.
When Tesla returned to New York from high-voltage air Colorado Springs, he wasn't just thinking about light bulbs or motors anymore. He was thinking about a global nervous system. He envisioned a world where a businessman in New York could dictate a message and have it appear instantly in London, or where a farmer in a remote village could pull power out of the air to light his home for free. To do this, he needed a giant. He needed a benefactor who didn't just have money, but who controlled the world's money. Enter J. Pierpont Morgan, the most powerful banker in history. Morgan was a man of cold, hard facts, while Tesla was a man of soaring, electric dreams. In 1901, Tesla managed to convince Morgan to invest $150,000, a massive sum at the time, into a project on Long Island. Tesla told Morgan he was building a world telegraphy station to beat Marconi in the race for transatlantic radio. But in the back of his mind, Tesla was playing a much bigger game. He wasn't just building a radio tower. He was building a world wireless system capable of transmitting unlimited electrical power through the Earth itself. He called it Wardenclyffe. Tesla hired the famous architect Stanford White to design the tower. It was a 187-foot wooden structure topped with a massive 55-ton hemispherical steel dome. But the real secret was underground. Tesla had workers dig 120 feet into Long Island soil, installing iron pipes that gripped the earth so he could, as he put it, shake the planet. He believed that if he could vibrate the Earth's electrical charge at just the right frequency, he could send power anywhere. He was fighting the ignorance of a world that thought of energy as something that had to be burned or carried in a wire. He saw the Earth as a giant tuning fork, and he was the only one who knew how to strike it. But then, the world of business collided with the world of science. In December 1901, Guglielmo Marconi successfully sent the first radio signal across the Atlantic. Marconi used a much simpler, cheaper setup. While Tesla was still building his massive masterpiece, Marconi had already won the race in the eyes of the public. J.P. Morgan began to get nervous. He asked Tesla why the project was taking so long and costing so much more than planned. Tesla, in a moment of desperate honesty, finally confessed his true goal. He wasn't just sending messages. He was going to send free power. Morgan's reaction was legendary for its cold efficiency. He supposedly looked at Tesla and asked, "If anyone can draw on the power, where do I put the meter?" To a man like Morgan, a technology that provided free energy was a disaster. If you couldn't charge people for it, it wasn't a business. It was a threat to his investments in copper, coal, and the entire existing electrical grid. Morgan refused to provide another penny. He even used his influence to make sure no other bankers would fund Tesla. He effectively blackballed the greatest inventor in the world. Tesla was devastated. He spent the next few years trying to keep the project alive, pouring his own money into it. But it was a sinking ship. The panic of 1907 wiped out what remained of his funds. Wardenclyffe, the Tower of Dreams, became a tower of silence. It sat there on Long Island, a giant, rusted skeleton of a future that never arrived. Tesla suffered a major nervous breakdown. His second, he would wander the streets of Manhattan at night, looking at the city lights and knowing that he was the one who had made them possible. Yet he was now being treated like a crazy man who had wasted a banker's money. The tower was eventually dynamited for scrap metal in 1917 to pay off Tesla's hotel bills. The world had chosen meters and wires over free wireless light. My project was retarded by laws of nature. The world was not prepared for it. It was too far ahead of time. But the same laws will prevail in the end and make it a triumphal success. Nikola Tesla.
Graphite dust on the collar of the coat, a bottle drifting with an unsent note. They measure output in ounces of gold, I measure worth in the stories untold. The pendulum swings through a hollow room, weaving a pattern on a dusty loom. One day they will understand me. The one who is right has no rush. The tide doesn't hurry to meet the sand. It just knows the shoreline. It understands. The right has no rush. It waits for the rain to wash all the static, to soothe all the pain. The future is patient.
Part 7. The Wizard of the Waldorf and the Mechanical Earthquake, 1907 to 1920.
After the collapse of Wardenclyffe, Tesla didn't disappear into a cave. Instead, he became a nomad of the high-end hotels. He lived in the Waldorf Astoria, the St. Regis, and eventually the Hotel New Yorker. He was often penniless, but he maintained the appearance of a gentleman, wearing his silk gloves and high collars, dining at the finest tables even if he couldn't pay the bill. He was fighting the ignorance of society that only valued a man's worth by his current bank balance. To the world, he was a has-been. To Tesla, he was simply waiting for the world to catch up to his next big idea. It was during these years that Tesla's behavior became truly eccentric. He developed a deep, almost mystical obsession with pigeons. He would walk to Bryant Park every day to feed them. But there was one white pigeon in particular that he claimed to love as a man loves a woman. He said that as long as he had her, his life had a purpose. He once spent over $2,000, money he didn't have, to build a special device to heal her broken wing and leg. He claimed that one night, the pigeon flew into his hotel room to tell him she was dying, and a light came from her eyes that was more intense than any lamp in my laboratory. When she died, something in Tesla died too. He began to retreat further into his own mind, talking more to the birds and to people. But his brain was still a factory of terrifying power. He developed a mechanical oscillator, a small device no bigger than an alarm clock. One afternoon in 1898, he attached it to a steel pillar in his lab and turned it on. The device created vibrations so perfectly tuned to the resonant frequency of the building that it started to shake the entire neighborhood. Windows shattered, pipes burst, and the police rushed to the scene thinking it was an earthquake. Tesla reportedly took a sledgehammer and smashed the device just as the cops broke down the door. He told them, "You are just in time to miss an interesting experiment." He had discovered how to use resonance as a weapon, a concept that modern engineers still study today. Then there was the 1915 Nobel Prize rumor. The press reported that Tesla and Edison were to share the Nobel Prize in physics, but the prize never came. Some say Tesla refused to share it with Edison. Others say Edison refused to share it with a mere inventor. Tesla's pride was his armor. He felt that being compared to a commercial inventor like Edison was an insult to his status as a discoverer of natural laws. He was fighting the ignorance of the scientific community that struggled to differentiate between gadgetry and pure science. Perhaps his most incredible feat during this era was his foresight. In a 1926 interview, he predicted exactly what you are holding in your hand right now. He said, "When wireless is perfectly applied, the whole Earth will be converted into a huge brain. We shall be able to communicate with one another instantly, irrespective of distance. A man will be able to carry one in his vest pocket." He described the smartphone, the internet, and global video calls decades before a single microchip existed. He wasn't guessing. He was seeing the logical conclusion of the waves he had discovered. He was a man living in 1920, with a mind already operating in 2026.
Part 8. The Peace Ray and the Shadow of the State, 1921 to 1934.
As Tesla entered his 70s, the world began to treat him like a character from a science fiction novel. He was no longer just an inventor. He was a prophet of the impossible. In the early 1930s, as the clouds of World War II began to gather over Europe, Tesla announced his most controversial invention yet, Teleforce, which the press immediately dubbed the Death Ray. Tesla hated that name. He envisioned it as a peace ray, an invisible wall of energy that could shoot down airplanes from 250 miles away. He believed that if every nation had this defensive shield, war would become impossible because no country could successfully attack another. He was fighting the ultimate ignorance, the belief that peace can only be achieved through better ways to kill. Despite his poverty and his obsession with pigeons, the scientific world hadn't forgotten him. In 1931, for his 75th birthday, Time magazine put him on the cover. He received congratulatory letters from over 70 pioneers of science, including Albert Einstein, who called him an eminent pioneer in the field of high-frequency currents. It was a rare moment of public validation for a man who felt the world had left him behind. But even in this celebration, there was an edge of sadness. While Einstein was reshaping the universe with relativity, Tesla was still trying to prove that he could tap into the ambient energy of the cosmos. He dismissed Einstein's theories as a beggar wrapped in purple whom ignorant people take for a king. Tesla's intellect was so rigid and refined that he couldn't accept a universe that didn't fit his own mechanical logic. This talk of death rays and shaking the earth didn't just catch the attention of the press. It caught the attention of the FBI. The U.S. government began to keep a secret file on the eccentric inventor. They weren't sure if he was a genius who had discovered a way to end war, or a madman whose notes could be used by enemies to destroy cities. They followed his movements, watched who he met with, and kept track of his mounting hotel debts. Tesla knew he was being watched, but he didn't care. He offered his Teleforce secrets to the U.S., Great Britain, and even the Soviet Union, hoping that a balance of power would prevent the coming slaughter. He was a man trying to save a world that was too busy arming itself to listen. During this time, Tesla also laid the groundwork for radar. Years before the British officially invented it, Tesla had described a system that could detect ships and planes using radio waves. He even tinkered with the idea of invisible ships, thinking about how to bend light or electricity around an object. While his contemporaries called these ideas fanciful, the military would spend billions of dollars decades later trying to make stealth technology a reality. Tesla was a man whose failures were simply blueprints for the next century. He was living in a room at the Hotel New Yorker, surrounded by pigeons and government shadows, holding the keys to the future in a mind that was slowly starting to fray. The scientists of today think deeply instead of clearly. One must be saying to think clearly, but one can think deeply and be quite insane. Nikola Tesla.
Part 10. The Lonely King of Room 3327 and the Final Breath, 1935 to 1943.
By the mid-1930s, Nikola Tesla had become a ghost haunting the hallways of the Hotel New Yorker. He lived in room 3327, a two-room suite on the 33rd floor. He was a man who had once been the toast of New York society, but now his only regular visitors were the hotel maids and the pigeons that lined his windowsill. He was living on a diet that would have killed a lesser man: warm milk, a few crackers, and some honey. He claimed this pure diet kept his mind sharp, but the truth was that he was destitute. Even in his poverty, Tesla's pride remained unshakable. He refused to accept charity. When George Westinghouse's company found out their founder's old friend was living in squalor, they didn't just hand him a check. They knew he'd reject it. Instead, they set up a consulting fee of $125 a month and paid his rent at the hotel for the rest of his life. Tesla accepted it, believing his advice was still worth millions. He was fighting the ignorance of a world that thinks a genius is only successful if he's making a profit. To Tesla, his success was written in the alternating current pulsing to the walls of every building in the city. On the night of January 7th, 1943, at the age of 86, the light finally went out. Tesla died alone in his room. He had placed a "Do Not Disturb" sign on his door 2 days earlier, and it wasn't until a maid eventually ignored the sign that his body was found. The man who had tamed Niagara Falls and dreamed of lighting the entire planet for free died with no family, no money, and only a few boxes of notes to his name. The news of his death hit the world like a silent shockwave. Even in the middle of World War II, the mayor of New York, Fiorello LaGuardia, gave a eulogy over the radio, saying, "Tesla is not dead. The real important part of Tesla lives in his achievement, which is great, almost beyond calculation. But the mystery was just beginning." Within hours of his death, the Office of Alien Property Custodian, basically the FBI's arm for handling foreign nationals' property, moved in. Despite Tesla being a naturalized American citizen for decades, they seized everything. They took 80 trunks filled with his notes, blueprints, and experimental records. They were terrified that his death ray, or other superweapons, might fall into the hands of the Axis powers. A young, brilliant engineer from MIT was called in to examine the papers to see if there was anything dangerous. That man's name was John G. Trump, yes, the uncle of the future president. After 3 days of searching, he officially reported that there was nothing workable in the notes, that they were the speculative dreams of an aging man. Many people didn't believe the official report then, and they don't believe it now. Conspiracy theories started to swirl. Did the government hide the secret to wireless energy? Did they steal the blueprints for a weapon that could end all wars? Tesla had spent his life fighting the ignorance of those who couldn't see the future, and in death, he left behind a vacuum of information that fueled 1,000 myths. He was a man who had given the world his best. And as he once said, "The present is theirs. The future, for which I really worked, is mine."
Part 11. The Golden Sphere and the Vindicated Ghost, 1943 to 2026.
After the FBI finished rifling through Tesla's trunks, the physical remnants of his life were eventually sent to Belgrade, the capital of modern-day Serbia. In the Nikola Tesla Museum, his ashes are kept in a glowing gold-plated sphere, a fittingly geometric and futuristic resting place for a man who hated the messiness of the natural world. But while his ashes stayed in a museum, his ideas were busy taking over the planet. For decades after his death, Tesla was a forgotten figure, a footnote in history books that gave all the credit to Thomas Edison and Guglielmo Marconi. He was a mad scientist of the 20th century, a cautionary tale about what happens when a genius doesn't have a business plan. But history has a way of correcting itself. As the digital age arrived, we realized that the world we live in is actually Tesla's world. Every time you flip a light switch, you are using his alternating current. Every time you use a smartphone, you are using the wireless communication and logic gates he predicted in the 1920s. Every time you use a remote control, a drone, or a neon light, you are touching a piece of his brain. In the 21st century, his name has become a global brand. When a young engineer named Elon Musk and his partners want a name for a car company that would revolutionize the world through electric power, they didn't name it Edison. They named it Tesla. They recognized that Tesla was the true architect of the electric future. Tesla's victory over the ignorance of his rivals was a slow burn, but it was total. In 1943, the U.S. Supreme Court finally overturned Marconi's radio patents, officially recognizing Nikola Tesla as a true inventor of radio. In 1960, the international scientific community named the unit of magnetic flux density the Tesla, placing his name alongside giants like Newton, Ampere, and Watt. He is no longer the eccentric immigrant who talked to pigeons. He is the patron saint of the modern geek, the hero of every visionary who has been told that their dreams are impossible. He proved that while money can buy influence, only genius can buy immortality. If Nikola Tesla were alive today, he probably wouldn't be surprised by our satellites, our internet, or our electric cars. He'd probably just ask why it took us so long. He'd look at the wires still hanging from our poles and sigh, waiting for the day we finally finish Wardenclyffe. He left us with a final haunting lesson, that the greatest energy in the universe isn't found in a waterfall or a piece of coal, but in the human mind's ability to see what isn't there yet. He was a child of light who spent his life fighting the darkness of ignorance. And in the end, he turned the whole world into a lamp. Let the future tell the truth and evaluate each one according to his work and accomplishments. The present is theirs. The future, for which I really worked, is mine.
Graphite dust on the collar of the coat, a bottle drifting with an unset note. They measure output in ounces of gold. I measure worth in the stories untold. The pendulum swings through a hollow room, weaving a pattern on a dusty loom. One day they will understand me. The one who is right has no rush. The tide doesn't hurry to meet the sand. It just knows the shoreline, it understands. The right has no rush, it waits for the rain to wash all the static, to soothe all the pain.